The story begins in Dallas, Texas in the summer of 2022. A successful businessman, Richard Lawson, had built a life that many would envy. In his late 30s, Richard was known in his community as ambitious, disciplined, and financially secure. His company had grown steadily over the years, providing him the wealth and comfort that placed him in the upper tier of suburban life. His home, located in a quiet residential neighborhood outside Dallas, stood as a symbol of his achievement. Large, modern, with well-kept gardens and secured gates, it was the kind of house that reflected stability and prosperity. By his side was Emily Lawson, his wife of 6 years. Emily was in her mid-30s, striking in appearance, well-dressed, and socially active. Neighbors described her as polite but distant, more focused on maintaining appearances than building close relationships within the community. Her lifestyle gave her away: the luxury handbags, the designer clothing, the expensive salon visits, and the frequent online deliveries. To outsiders, she appeared as the picture of success, a woman married to a wealthy, powerful man, living in comfort without limits. But appearances, as often is the case, concealed deeper tensions. Within the Lawson family, Emily's presence was not universally welcomed. Richard's younger sister, Samantha Lawson, carried a heavy skepticism about Emily from the very beginning. Samantha was in her mid-20s, sharp-minded, and deeply attached to her brother. She had been with Richard through his early struggles before his financial breakthrough. She had seen him sacrifice, work long hours, and carry the burden of building the Lawson name into one that commanded respect. To Samantha, her brother was more than family. He was her protector, her role model, and the central figure in her life. When Richard married Emily, Samantha's suspicion took root. She believed Emily had targeted her brother not out of love, but out of a calculated desire for wealth. That belief did not fade with time, it intensified. Every shopping trip, every expensive purchase, every glamorous night out became, in Samantha's eyes, evidence of manipulation. While Richard dismissed these concerns, Samantha never let go of her conviction. The tension grew behind closed doors. Conversations at family gatherings often turned cold. Samantha's remarks about Emily were sharp, sometimes open, sometimes veiled, but always hostile. Richard attempted to keep peace between the two women, but the divide was unbridgeable. Emily avoided Samantha whenever possible, while Samantha grew increasingly vocal about her distrust. The situation worsened as Richard's business success deepened. Emily seemed to lean into her lifestyle, hosting dinner parties, buying jewelry, and living in a way that Samantha considered reckless. For Samantha, this was no longer just about disliking her sister-in-law, it became about protecting her brother's hard-earned fortune from being drained. She believed Emily was only waiting for the moment she could take advantage of Richard completely, perhaps even leaving him once his usefulness expired. By early 2022, Samantha's distrust had evolved into obsession. She began keeping a personal notebook, filled with notes on Emily's spending habits, her social events, and even her private conversations. Samantha tracked her movements, convinced that patterns of greed would emerge. She noted the dates of luxury deliveries, the frequency of Emily's salon visits, and even the cost of her clothing. She photographed receipts, screenshotted social media posts, and created her own version of a case file. This was not investigation in the professional sense, it was obsession disguised as protection. Samantha believed she was documenting the truth that her brother refused to see. Richard, meanwhile, remained blinded by affection. To him, Emily was a supportive partner, someone who stood by him as his business grew. He saw her as elegant, charming, and loyal. Whenever Samantha raised accusations, Richard dismissed them as jealousy or overprotectiveness. He reassured his sister that Emily loved him, that their marriage was solid, and that she had no reason to worry. But Richard's reassurances only fueled Samantha's rage. In her mind, Emily had not only deceived him, but had blinded him to reality. And to Samantha, the longer Emily remained in the picture, the greater the risk to Richard's future. The Lawson household from the outside seemed unshaken. But inside, pressure mounted silently. Richard moved between his love for Emily and his loyalty to his sister, unaware of how deeply Samantha's resentment had grown. Emily, sensing the hostility, distanced herself even more, avoiding family gatherings whenever Samantha was present. That distance, however, was interpreted by Samantha as arrogance and proof of guilt. By the middle of the year, Samantha had crossed a threshold. She was no longer simply a skeptical sister. She was a woman convinced that Emily was a threat. The idea hardened in her mind. Emily was not family, she was an intruder, a manipulator, and a parasite living off her brother's achievements. The belief became constant, unshakable, and dangerous. Every passing week, Samantha's thoughts revolved more around Emily. She played scenarios in her head, imagined confrontations, and rehearsed the words she would one day say to Richard to make him see the truth. But words no longer seemed enough. To Samantha, Emily had to be removed permanently. That conviction marked the beginning of a deadly shift. The atmosphere within the Lawson family had become toxic. The public image of wealth and success masked an internal storm. On one side stood Emily, living her life without awareness of how deep her sister-in-law's hatred had become. On the other side was Samantha, feeding her obsession, building resentment, and preparing for action. The stage was set for tragedy. It was only a matter of time before suspicion turned to violence. The months that followed deepened the fracture within the Lawson family. What began as suspicion had by now grown into something much darker, an obsession that consumed Samantha Lawson day by day. Samantha could no longer look at her sister-in-law without seeing danger. She believed, with absolute certainty, that Emily Lawson was draining her brother Richard of everything he had worked for. Samantha's mind filtered every event through that belief. If Emily went shopping, it meant she was careless with Richard's money. If she hosted friends, it meant she was flaunting wealth that didn't belong to her. If she smiled at Richard in public, it was performance, not love. Nothing Emily did was viewed as genuine. Everything was twisted into evidence of manipulation. By early summer, Samantha began to dedicate her evenings to gathering what she considered proof. She parked her car on the opposite side of the Lawson residence, quietly watching the house. She recorded the times Emily left for errands, the outfits she wore, the bags she carried. She tracked online purchases by memorizing delivery schedules. She combed through Emily's social media accounts, saving photos that highlighted her luxury lifestyle. Each file was stored neatly in Samantha's growing notebook, an archive of what she believed was undeniable truth. The notebook itself became a symbol of her obsession. Page after page was filled with handwritten notes, dates, times, and dollar estimates of Emily's spending. Samantha compared receipts she managed to find with online prices, calculating totals, circling amounts in red ink, labeling them evidence. In her mind, she was building a case, one that would one day expose Emily to her brother. But Richard remained blind. Every attempt Samantha made to present her findings ended in frustration. Richard dismissed her words as exaggeration, jealousy, or misunderstanding. He told his sister that Emily was his wife, his partner, and he trusted her. He urged Samantha to let go, to stop looking for faults, and to focus on her own life. To Samantha, those words were a betrayal. She interpreted Richard's loyalty to Emily as weakness, blindness, even victimhood. She convinced herself that Emily had manipulated him so thoroughly that reason no longer reached him. The rejection only strengthened Samantha's resolve. If Richard would not see the truth, she would have to act on his behalf. Her surveillance deepened. She began following Emily during the day, trailing her car from a distance. She watched as Emily pulled into luxury boutiques, stayed inside for hours, and emerged with shopping bags. Samantha snapped photos from her phone, saving them as visual proof. She followed Emily to high-end salons, where she spent entire afternoons being pampered. To Samantha, these trips were not harmless indulgences but proof of exploitation. The spiral tightened. Samantha stopped caring about her own life. Her job, her friendships, and her routines all suffered as she dedicated more and more time to monitoring Emily. She avoided social events, spending her nights compiling data. She grew isolated, locked inside a world where her sister-in-law was the enemy and she was the only one who could stop her. In her apartment, Samantha began practicing speeches. She would stand before a mirror, rehearsing the words she wanted to say to Richard. "She's using you. She's going to destroy you. You have to see what I see." But each time she practiced, she imagined his refusal. She pictured him defending Emily, dismissing her, shutting her down. That vision hardened her heart. At some point in late July, Samantha's obsession tipped from surveillance to planning. The thought entered her mind quietly at first. What if Emily was no longer there? What if the threat was eliminated entirely? The idea shocked her. But only for a moment. She rationalized it quickly. Emily wasn't family. Emily wasn't a wife in the true sense, she was a parasite. To remove her was not murder, Samantha believed, but rescue. It was the act of a sister protecting her brother from destruction. The thought became seed. That seed grew. Samantha began imagining scenarios. She pictured confrontations in public, arguments in private, and ultimately violent encounters. She thought of knives, of blunt objects, of silence in the Lawson home when Richard was away. Each day, these visions played in her head more vividly, until they no longer felt like fantasy but inevitability. In her mind, the question was no longer if Emily should be removed. It was when. By August, Samantha's preparations turned physical. She retrieved one of the large kitchen knives from her apartment and began carrying it in her car. She wrapped it in an old towel, placed it under the driver's seat, and told herself it was only for protection. But deep down, she knew its purpose. The weapon was a promise to herself, that when the opportunity came, she would not hesitate. Opportunity did come. Richard had planned a short business trip, leaving Dallas for one night in mid-August. The details slipped casually in conversation, but Samantha seized on them immediately. Emily would be alone. The house would be quiet. There would be no witnesses, no interference. In the days leading to Richard's departure, Samantha's thoughts narrowed to a single point: execution. She timed her approach. She studied the neighborhood security cameras, knowing where the blind spots were. She reminded herself that she still had the spare key from years earlier, when she had been trusted to watch the house while Richard traveled. Her plan was set. But even in her planning, Samantha convinced herself of righteousness. She did not see herself as a murderer but as a savior. In her mind, she was the only one willing to protect her brother from ruin. She told herself she was brave, that she had the courage to do what Richard could not. The rising action of this story is not marked by sudden bursts of drama, but by steady, dangerous obsession. Each decision Samantha made pushed her further down a path from which there was no return. Each note in her book, each photograph, each calculation reinforced her distorted reality. By August 13th, her obsession had fully transformed into intent. She drove past Richard's house one last time, scanning the street, memorizing shadows, convincing herself the plan was flawless. The next night would be decisive. The stage was set. The motive was fixed. The plan was ready. Emily Lawson, unaware of the storm building in her sister-in-law's mind, moved through her evening routine without suspicion. She believed she was safe in her own home. She believed her husband's trip was nothing unusual. But Samantha Lawson believed otherwise. She believed August 14th would be the night she finally saved her brother from the woman she considered a manipulative thief. She believed violence was not only justified but necessary. The line between suspicion and murder had vanished. And with it, so had any hope of preventing the tragedy that was about to unfold. On the night of August 14, 2022, the Lawson home in Dallas stood in silence. Richard Lawson was away on a short business trip, leaving his wife, Emily, alone inside the house. It was a warm evening, quiet in the neighborhood, with no signs that anything unusual was about to unfold. Inside the kitchen, Emily prepared a late dinner. The lights were on, the air conditioning hummed softly, and music played faintly in the background. She was alone, expecting nothing more than an ordinary evening. But outside, a car pulled up several houses away. Behind the wheel was Samantha Lawson. She had been waiting for this night. The kitchen knife, wrapped in cloth, sat beside her in the passenger seat. She had driven the route in her head dozens of times. Tonight it was real. At 9:42 p.m., Samantha stepped out of the car. She carried nothing visible, her movements calm but calculated. The street was dark, only faintly lit by a few porch lights. She walked quickly, her mind clear. In her pocket was a spare key she had kept from years before. Reaching the side door of the house, Samantha paused briefly, scanning the quiet surroundings. No neighbors were outside. No cars passed. She pulled out the key, slid it into the lock, and turned it slowly. The door clicked open. Inside, Emily heard nothing over the sound of her music. She continued slicing vegetables on the counter, unaware her killer had just entered the house. Samantha closed the door softly behind her. She knew the layout of the house, every hallway, every turn. She moved through the darkness, knife in hand, toward the kitchen. The seconds that followed were decisive. Emily sensed movement behind her. She turned, expecting perhaps her husband home early, or maybe just a noise from the house settling. Instead, she saw her sister-in-law standing in the doorway, her face cold, her eyes fixed. There were no words. Samantha stepped forward, raising the knife. Emily's reaction was delayed by shock. Her hands lifted instinctively in defense, but there was no time to scream, no chance to flee. The first thrust drove into her chest. The sound of metal piercing flesh broke the silence of the kitchen. Emily gasped, stumbling backward, clutching at the wound. Blood spread quickly across her blouse. She tried to push Samantha away, but the attack did not stop. The second strike came fast, then the third. Each one delivered with force, fueled not by rage in the moment, but by months of building conviction. Samantha's face remained expressionless, her movements steady and deliberate. Emily collapsed against the counter, sliding to the floor. She struggled to breathe, her voice breaking into weak gasps. Her hands pressed desperately against her wounds, but the bleeding was severe. Samantha stood over her, knife still in hand. For a brief moment she looked down, watching as Emily's life slipped away. To her this was not murder, it was completion. She believed she had done what her brother could not. She believed she had saved him. The kitchen floor was stained with blood. Emily's body twitched faintly, then went still. The attack had lasted less than 2 minutes. Samantha wiped the knife on the cloth, turned and walked back toward the door. She left the house the same way she had entered, quietly, quickly, without hesitation. By 9:50 p.m. she was back in her car, driving into the night. Inside the Lawson home, Emily's body lay motionless on the kitchen floor. The music still played softly. The lights remained on. Nothing else moved. By morning, Richard Lawson would return to find the scene himself. But on that night, only one person knew what had happened inside the house: his own sister. The next morning, August 15, 2022, Richard Lawson returned home from his business trip. When he entered through the front door, the house felt unnaturally quiet. He called for his wife, expecting her to appear from the kitchen. There was no response. Moments later, he stepped into the kitchen and froze. Emily Lawson's body lay on the floor, surrounded by dried blood. The sight was overwhelming, her blouse soaked red, her skin pale, her eyes open but lifeless. The dinner she had been preparing remained unfinished on the counter. The music, still faintly playing, made the scene even more chilling. Richard dropped to his knees, shaking, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. His call to 911 came at 7:32 a.m., his voice panicked, his words broken. Police units and paramedics rushed to the scene, but it was too late. Emily had been dead for hours. Detectives immediately noted the unusual details. There were no signs of forced entry. The doors and windows were intact. Expensive items, jewelry, electronics, cash remained untouched. This was not a burglary. It was deliberate. Forensic teams began their work. The wounds told the story. Multiple stab injuries to the chest, consistent with a close-range attack. The precision suggested personal intent, not random violence. Whoever killed Emily had known the layout of the home, had access to it, and had come with purpose. Investigators turned quickly to those closest to the victim. Richard was questioned but released. His alibi was airtight. He had been out of town with documented proof of his trip. That eliminated him. Attention then shifted to family. Within days, suspicion fell on Samantha Lawson. Detectives learned of her long history of hostility toward Emily. Friends and relatives confirmed that Samantha had often voiced her belief that Emily was using Richard for money. She had confronted Emily in the past, sometimes openly, sometimes in tense private exchanges. Phone records placed Samantha near Richard's house on the night of the murder. Surveillance footage from neighborhood cameras captured her car passing through the area around the same time. The evidence tightened quickly. When questioned, Samantha showed little emotion. Investigators pressed her about her whereabouts, about her access to the spare key, about the hostility she had shown toward Emily. Her answers were short, evasive, and inconsistent. Eventually the truth came out. Samantha admitted she had entered the house. She admitted she confronted Emily. She admitted she stabbed her multiple times. But she did not call it murder. She called it protection. In her mind, she was saving her brother from ruin. She explained that Emily was a manipulator, a parasite, and that removing her was necessary. Her voice remained cold as she described her actions, as if she believed her reasoning justified the violence. The case moved quickly through the courts. The prosecution presented a clear timeline: obsession, planning, and execution. They introduced Samantha's notebook, filled with notes and receipts, as evidence of her fixation. They showed the surveillance footage, the phone records, and the forensic match of the knife found in Samantha's possession. The defense attempted to argue diminished responsibility, pointing to Samantha's mental instability. But the jury was unmoved. The evidence was overwhelming. Samantha Lawson was convicted of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. For Richard Lawson, the verdict was a hollow victory. He had lost his wife in a brutal act of violence. He had also lost his sister, consumed by obsession, now condemned to spend her life behind bars. The case closed with a grim lesson. Jealousy, obsession, and distorted perception had destroyed an entire family. The home in Dallas where Emily Lawson lost her life remains a silent reminder of that night. A reminder that the threat came not from a stranger, but from within the family itself.